All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing something really fascinating. We're putting on our linguist hats and conducting a rigorous, systematic autopsy. Our goal? To peel back centuries of translation layers and reveal the original, literal architecture of an ancient text, the Quran. We're tossing aside established religious tradition and relying purely on linguistic consistency, letting the text act as its own dictionary.
Think about this for a second. What if centuries of translation have fundamentally altered the text? It brings us to a really compelling thought experiment, based entirely on the source material. What if later theological assumptions basically overwrote the original literal root meanings? Are we just reading a passive book of ancient history? Or are we missing an active, structural manual designed to map out human behavioral patterns?
So here's our roadmap for this scholarly autopsy. We're going to tackle the translation bias problem, run a systematic root analysis, redefine a few major concepts, look at a really misunderstood analogy about a dog, and then pull it all together to see how this completely reframes core theological ideas. Let's get right into it.
Starting with Section 1, the translation bias problem. We really need to document the core issue here, and we're going to use Quranic verse 4:16 as our primary specimen to do exactly that.
When you look at the breakdown of this verse, it's actually pretty wild. It simply states that some messengers have been recounted to the recipient and others haven't. That is literally it. It doesn't set up some exhaustive, holy catalog of special VIP individuals. The surrounding passage is merely arguing that, hey, guidance has repeatedly reached humanity over time.
If we strip this all the way down to the purely lexical level, the word rasul and its plural rusul just means one sent, or a bearer of a message. So logically, the safest, most accurate translation is one that completely avoids importing heavy theological baggage about who or what these individuals are. The text is entirely focused on the communication of the message itself.
And you know what? The grammar totally backs up this literal approach. Take the phrase Kallama Allahu Musa takliman. Classical Arabic actually uses the verbal noun here, takliman, which literally means a speaking, for absolute emphasis. Doing this removes all the ambiguity. It confirms an actual direct communication took place. It is precise, it's literal, and it leaves absolutely zero room for imported biases.
Moving into Section 2, systematic root analysis. Because to bypass all these built-in biases, we absolutely have to establish strict linguistic ground rules.
We can't just rely on outside dogma, right? We have to let the text act as its own dictionary. So here's our four-step analytical engine. First, identify the underlying root. Second, strip away all those traditional assumptions. Third, cross-reference its usage across the entire text. And finally, extract a logically consistent meaning. It's like solving a giant puzzle.
All right, Section 3, redefining terms. Let's actually put this methodology to the test and apply it to the root q, sha, sha.
We're going to test this root against verse 12:3, which is famously, and I mean famously, mistranslated as telling the best of stories. But grammatically, the text does not say we tell you stories about ancient history. If we cross-reference the root qss elsewhere, like there's a verse where a sister is told to trace her brother's path, we find it consistently means to follow, to lay out a trace or map a sequence. So 12:3 is actually saying the revelation conveys the best tracing out of reality, the best mapping of structural patterns.
And this is a real game changer for how we understand the end of that very same verse, which mentions the recipient was previously among the ghafilin. That root, it indicates a lack of awareness of something right in front of you. So the recipient wasn't just ignorant of ancient history. They were completely unaware of the profound structural patterns of reality that this text was about to map out for them.
Which brings us to Section 4, tahmil, dogs, and metha. Let's put another fascinating root under the microscope.
For this, we'll look at a specific textual analogy, what's known as a muthal. In verse 7:176, there's this analogy about a person clinging to worldly desires, and it concludes with فَأُقْصُصِ الْقَصَص, so that they may reflect. Boom, there's that root again, QSS. The point here isn't to entertain people with animal folklore. It's laying out a behavioral trace to spark deep critical reflection.
Now here is where it gets absolutely amazing. Traditional translations will tell you a dog pants if you drive it away, but our root analysis of ham, lam proves it consistently means to carry or bear a burden. Literally, it translates to if you place a burden upon it, it pants, and if you leave it alone, it pants. Guys, it's not some negative moral ruling on dogs. It's a brilliant, precise behavioral observation. A person governed by their base desires is exactly like a burdened dog. Their internal state is constantly panting, shifting, whether external pressure is applied or not.
So, Section 5, History versus Structural Patterns. If the text isn't just reciting literal history or handing down arbitrary rulings on animals, what exactly is its actual educational function?
Well, verse 12:11:11 gives us the explicit answer. It states that in their qasas, their laid-out patterns, is an ibra. This verse emphatically, and I mean emphatically, contrasts fabricated historical tales with actual detailed exposition and guidance. It completely dismantles the whole idea that historical storytelling is the main objective here.
The entire objective is to extract an ibra. And what does that root mean? Fundamentally, it means crossing from one side to another. It's an insight, a logical conclusion. The true educational value of tracing these patterns is so that you can cross over from just passively observing to reaching a profound structural understanding of reality.
All right, final section, section 6, reframing core theological concepts. Let's synthesize everything we found and see how this shifts the whole picture.
This chart right here systematically exposes the massive, glaring discrepancies between mainstream dogma and rigorous root analysis. By shedding theological bias, the mechanics of translation completely flip. Look at it. We move from passive historical storytelling to the active tracing of structural patterns. We go from attacking dogs to bearing loads, from just preserving ancient history to actively crossing over to logical insights.
And here is where this active pattern recognition becomes truly explosive. Take verse 40:26, which captures Pharaoh's justification for wanting to kill Moses. Notice the deep irony here. Pharaoh doesn't say Moses is a liar. No. He says, I fear he will change your deen, your established order. The tyrant is justifying silencing dissent not with actual proof, but by portraying the challenger as a direct threat to the established social system. Sound familiar?
When we read this as a manual of patterns, verse 28:4 basically blows the doors off traditional history. The text doesn't define Pharaoh by his Egyptian nationality or some specific ancient dynasty. It defines the Pharaoh concept purely by behavior, elevating oneself above others, dividing people into factions, weakening targeted groups, and acting corruptly. The text isn't asking, hey, which ancient king was this? It's actively inviting us to recognize these exact archetypal behaviors in any concentration of power, anywhere, at any time in human history.
Which brings us to the end of our linguistic autopsy. When we finally clear away the translation bias and let the roots speak for themselves, the text transforms entirely. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If we shift our perspective from passively consuming ancient historical stories to actively tracing these timeless behavioral patterns, how might recognizing these dynamics empower you to read the modern world around you differently? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the patterns.